Peace and blessings, family. Brother Shareef up in the mix again, bringing you truth, justice, and equality, and trying to open up your mind to the truth and history of our people. Getting right to it tonight, I want to talk about the shocking life and story of Ruby McCollum, a sister that probably most people have never heard of before, but in a spiritual way, I want to bring her sort of back to life so people know what this sister and her family endured, not 400 or 500 years ago, but just 40, 50 years ago, what this sister went through. Ruby McCollum was born Ruby Johnson in 1909 in Florida. She met her soon-to-be husband, Sam McCollum, in Florida. They relocated to New York, and there they had 3-4 beautiful children. At that time, now you're talking about her and her husband got married in 1932. During that time, it was a time what they called the Great Migration, where a lot of black people were relocating from the South to the North looking for jobs and better treatment, even though anywhere where these people are, you ain't going to get better treatment for them, talking about Europeans. But they did the opposite. They went, instead of coming from the South to the North, they went to the North to the South and relocated to an area called Live Oak, Florida, where Sam McCollum, which is Ruby McCollum's husband, he went there and met up with his brother, Buck McCollum. Buck McCollum had amassed a huge amount of wealth in Live Oak, Florida in the 1940s and 50s. He basically had a gambling ring. It is what it is. Black people had to do what they had to do at that time. But Buck McCollum, the brother of Sam McCollum, had amassed a huge amount of wealth in Live Oak, Florida in the 1940s. Of course, he clicked his brother on, Sam McCollum, and then they amassed a huge amount of wealth through the gambling ring. Sam McCollum and his wife, Ruby McCollum, had a funeral service business, farmland, and in Live Oak, Florida at that time, it was only 4,000 to 5,000 people in Live Oak, Florida, the population. Do you know they were the richest, one of the richest families in Florida in the 1940s, which is amazing for black people, by them having the funeral service business, the gambling business, farmland. They had it going on. It is reported that not only were they the richest family in Live Oak, Florida at that time, they had a beautiful 3-story home with their children. It said that they bought a new Cadillac and Chrysler each year, and all the businesses they had, they were worth a whole lot of money. Here's the thing that makes this story about this woman's life so shocking and riveting and heart-wrenching. At that time, and if you remember the TV show Sanford and Son, do you remember how it was always a white doctor? It used to make house calls there for basic doctor visits. Well, at that time, it was the same thing. It was an evil, wicked demon by the name of Dr. Leroy C. Adams. He was a doctor and he was a senator, and he was supposedly attending to the needs of inner city and poor people. Even though Ruby and Sam McCollum were far from poor, he would make house visits for his doctor visits. His Dr. Leroy C. Adams. But he had other intentions of giving health care. Do you know he started making sexual advances towards Ruby McCollum in the presence of her husband, Sam McCollum? He started making sexual advances towards her. And I know what you're thinking right away. Well, why would this man, Sam McCollum, let this white man come in his house and disrespect him like that? You're talking about the 1940s and 50s in the deep South in Florida, where nowhere in this country that black people have rights, and black women certainly didn't have rights. You could rape a black woman, it wouldn't even go to trial, because they said she don't have no rights, she don't have no say. There was no safe sanctuary for a black woman at that time. So this man was making house visits, not for medical attention, but to make sexual inappropriate advances to Ruby McCollum. He did it in the presence of Sam McCollum, but mostly when he was out hustling, trying to make a way from his family, this man would make unannounced visits, meaning this Dr. Leroy C. Adams, who was also a powerful senator at that time, he would make unannounced visits and started making sexual advances to Ruby McCollum. This went on for years till finally in 1948, he got her pregnant and she had a biracial child named Loretta McCollum. He got her pregnant, but it's all throughout the reports that Ruby McCollum was not going along with this supposed relationship. But she was basically forced to do it because of the time and the climate being in the deep South. This was reported that this would go on in the presence of this man, meaning Sam McCollum. Sometimes he was there in his own house and there was nothing he could do. And it's easy for us to say, well, I wouldn't have put up with that. It's easy for you to say what you'll do and won't do if you're not in that situation until you're actually in that situation. So this man, this Leroy C. Adams, was having a sexual relationship by force with Ruby McCollum for years, and it's said he got impregnated her twice, but the first child for sure was a girl by the name of Loretta McCollum. Make a long story short, finally in 1952, after being forced to have a sexual relationship with this white man in her house in the presence of her husband, while her husband was gone, raping her, abusing her, finally she, with her children, went to his office, meaning Dr. Leroy C. Adams, who was also a powerful senator, and said, enough is enough. I'm not doing this anymore. You're not going to abuse me. You're not going to disrespect my family and my husband. I will not do anything with you anymore. Remember, it was by force. This was a wonderful sister. She was a family woman and she was loyal to her husband. They supposedly got into a heated argument in exchange. She pulled out a revolver and shot Dr. Leroy C. Adams 4 times and murdered him in 1952. Supposedly, well, not supposedly, the next day they said her husband, which is Sam McCollum, supposedly just died. He just died. Some reports said he had a heart attack. He was assassinated and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. The day after Leroy C. Adams was murdered by his wife, which is Ruby McCollum, her husband, Sam McCollum, one of the most powerful men and black men in Live Oak, Florida, after they amassed all this wealth, he supposedly dies. He was assassinated. We know that. It don't take no rocket science to figure that. So he dies the next day. She goes to trial. This is why I stood with Colin Kaepernick when he didn't stand for the flag, freedom and justice for all, not us. And then when you go to trial, you're supposed to have a trial of jury of your peers. Do you know in this trial, this murder trial, that she murdered this doctor that was raping her and forcing her to have sex with him, basically made her a sex slave for years? Do you know that the jury was all white men? And then it's reported that at least 4 of the jurors that were all white men was Dr. Leroy C. Adams' patients, because he was a doctor. I'm going to say that again. At least 4 or 5 of the 11 or 12 jurors were his patients. And every time her attorney, which was Frank Cannon, a white man, Ruby McCollum's attorney, tried to but bring up that his client, which was Ruby McCollum, was forced into this relationship and it wasn't consensual, the other attorney for Dr. Leroy C. Adams, the state, objected 38 times, and all 38 times the judge sustained the objection, saying you can't bring up that the relationship wasn't consensual. It was a kangaroo court, just like courts are kangarooed against black people today. So she was found guilty, sentenced to death in 1952 for the murder of Dr. Leroy C. Adams. The attorney appealed it. In 1954, they went back for a second trial. By then, the woman had half lost her mind. The only reason it went all the way to the Supreme Court, the only way she got out of the death penalty was they commit her to a mental asylum in a place called Chicopee, Florida in 1954. In this mental asylum, talking about Ruby McCollum, this is the second trial. First trial, they found her guilty of murder. They took it all, went to a second trial all the way to Supreme Court. She got committed to a mental asylum in Chicopee, Florida. They gave her shock treatment and Thorazine. Thorazine is a very dangerous, strong antipsychotic medication that will have side effects that'll just blow your mind. She didn't have no memory, so she couldn't testify anymore from the shock treatment and the dangerous medication Thorazine that they gave her. Memory just totally wiped away. Finally, the sister passed away in this mental asylum in Chicopee, Florida in 1992. And there's not many reports of what happened to her children, but I know it is some reports that they, hung in there with their mother. But basically, this poor sister, Ruby McCollum, life was destroyed behind this wicked devil, this demon, who was supposed to be offering a service, came there, forced his way on Ruby McCollum. It wasn't consensual, got her pregnant with at least one child that we know of, Loretta McCollum, which is a biracial child. And it's reports that he impregnated her twice. Found guilty of the electric chair. The court was kangarooed and then sentenced to, committed to a mental asylum in 1954. Then finally she passed away in 1992. Rest in peace, Ruby McCollum. Sister, we will not forget you. If I'm the only person that brings up your name, I'm doing the best that I can. But this isn't nothing new, and I'm done. Get this book. It's called At the Dark End of the Street, Black Women, Rape, and the New History of Resistance of the Civil Rights Movement and the Rise of Black Power. This book, this powerful book written by Daniel McGuire, talks about how the Civil Rights Movement wasn't started by Rosa Parks sitting on a bus and refusing to get up. It talks about how the Civil Rights Movement actually started by black women being viciously raped in the streets of Alabama and the Deep South. See there? The resistance of the Civil Rights Movement, and with Rosa Parks, black women and rape. Black women being raped on buses, on street corners, at their job by white men mercilessly, and couldn't go to court and get any kind of justice, because we already talked about that. That's what this book talks about. How I'm going to say it again, how the Civil Rights Movement did not start with Rosa Parks not refusing to give up her seat on the bus like many of us are taught. The Civil Rights Movement actually started by the rape of black women by white men, police officers, senators, lawyers, whoever wanted a black woman, they could rape them anywhere, in the public, at bus stops, on the bus while it's moving, in their home. A lot of black women would because they didn't have no other jobs, will go to homes of white people and clean and take care of their children. They also became sex slaves. And that's what actually started the Civil Rights Movement. And then Rosa Parks, because she worked for many civil rights, not civil rights, but many different companies who would stick up for black people. She started speaking up for black people, and then from there, that's how the Civil Rights Movement started. It didn't start with her not sitting on the bus. That's something that came in the mid-1950s, but black people were being abused way before them, black women, and that's how the Civil Rights Movement started. So I hope you learned something from this message. Again, rest in peace, Ruby McCollum. It is an example of what our people suffered, past, present, and future. And her name will not die, not as long as I'm around. Ruby McCollum. You should see the spelling of her name in the title of this lecture. So again, I hope you learned from this message. Peace, blessing, and pray to the ancestors and to the Most High that we get justice and come from under the grips and get this demon off of our neck. We have suffered a great deal, and we have to be thankful for our ancestors because they went through a lot to preserve us. Peace and blessing.